Super special episode of the Nero Show featuring Joe from China Cycling. Joe takes us behind the curtain of the factories making our bikes and wheels in China. Who's making their own stuff? Who's ripping off others? And what's the future of R&D? Everything coming out of the East. This is a bumper episode, so settle yourself in. But before we get started,
make sure you subscribe to the Chris Miller Cycling channel on YouTube, otherwise the Panda gets it.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Joe Show.
Thank you for having me.
I want to chat factories. Wheels, the Chinese wheels, the direct from Asia wheels are so well established now that it's almost a joke. It's like, pick a sub 1,300 gram carbon spoked, decently wide wheel. There's about 1,000 of them and they're all pretty good. But I'm curious, where are these things coming from? Who's actually making, who's designing wheels and having them made? Who actually owns what brands have their own factories? And who's just doing just OEM stuff?
Good question. So I'd say one thing that is very popular around here in all industries is like the ability to like have your radar on and see what's making money and then quickly being able to like copy it. And that's been definitely happening in the bike industry. So I think last time we talked, I said the bike industry in China was booming. And there was one point, like maybe last year, where almost every week there was a new bike brand coming out. And almost every time you could look at the hub and you could see whose hub it was. You could look at the spokes, you could see whose spokes there were. And you could look at the rim and you could probably kind of guess where it was from as well. Like, because in Xiamen, it's like a double-edged sword. Within, 50 kilometers of where I'm sitting right now, there are multiple hub factories, most of the world's rim factories, and loads of those can also make carbon spokes as well. So the barrier to entry to start a wheel brand is super low now. It's the lowest it's ever been. Most of these factories, if you're not opening your own mold, you're not doing your own design, you just want them to slap your logo on it. The minimum order quantity, maybe like just 50 pairs. So super easy just to go up and set up a wheel brand. And so I think back in the day, we saw lots of the overseas brands doing this. I know you guys had Kakash, however it's pronounced, the other day, like, they're open that, their stuff is a Chinese sourced thing, no problem with that. But now I think lots of these factories and lots of the local brands have been like, well, we can do that too, we can slap a lick of paint on it, throw up a Shopify website and put these on the road. And the barrier to entry is lower than ever, as I say. And also lots of the factories here have also pivoted their methods. Instead of aiming for the Western brands who they know all have warehouses full of stock from the past 2 years, they're encouraging local people to start their own brands as well. And so, you see these days, as Jesse says, like they all on paper, they look like really competitive wheels. The price to weight ratio especially is always crazy. There's just a new one coming up every day.
Does it matter in the sense that, these guys are slapping OEM brands together. Like, does that make any difference from the factory owning and making its own wheel at the end of the day in terms of the product that's produced?
Yeah, so I'll say point number one, like more choice is always good for consumers, right? Because my thing that I always go on about with Panda Podium and stuff, there's no such thing as the best wheel in the world. There's the best wheel for you on today's course. So the more brands we have making wheels and the more combinations we have of factory A's hub with factory B's spokes and factory C's rim, the more combinations we have, the more likely someone's going to be able to be to find their perfect combination. Like, you see it on weight winners all the time, like people really splitting hairs, like, oh, I want the front wheel of this brand's wheel set, but I want the rear wheel of that brand's wheel set with the spoke count of the CRW, blah, blah, blah. And like, you're like, okay,
we're guilty of that big time.
Yeah. So, us nerds, we have really, really precise ideas of what we want. So the more brands we have knocking these out, the more likely you are to find something you like. Now, to go back to your question of like, who is doing the R&D, who's just getting stuff off the shelf, and does it really matter, is a huge, huge rabbit hole. Like I said, now the barrier to entry is really low, so you do get lots of brands who maybe don't really know what they're doing, and maybe they just have a spreadsheet of prices, and they're just trying to find something that looks good price-wise for them, and then looks good on paper in terms of weight, and then they can flog it. And maybe I know there are brands that have no one in the brand who actually rides bikes, and they're literally just pushing spreadsheets and doing pretty pictures. Now, again, infinite monkeys with infinite typewriters. Someone's going to write Shakespeare, right? So let's let them keep throwing mud at the wall and see what sticks. I think this is something we'll come back to later when we talk about aero testing as well. But yeah, I don't really mind like the barrier to entry being lower because, as I said, more choice is always good. But it irks me a bit when I see the Chat GPT blurb saying like, "Oh, we engineered this hub or we engineered this wheel set." I'm like, mate, you got an off-the-shelf hub from HateWorks down the road. Don't talk to me about engineering.
Is there a middle ground? Because okay, we can probably all name a brand that, like the Case ones, for example. They're not pretending they own a freaking carbon rim manufacturing facility in China, right? So that's okay. That's fine. Everyone kind of knows that. Then you've got the brands that clearly develop their own wheels, unless I'm totally lost the mark, like WindSpace. They have their own facilities. Is there a middle ground where they don't necessarily own a factory, but they still can totally dictate how the product's actually made? Is CRW in that bucket?
So I think we need to like go through the range. So just now you talked about WindSpace. I know Jasper went around their factory in his video that he put up a few months ago. So this is like public knowledge. And yeah, like in that video, like the factory that makes their rims isn't their own factory. Like they're pretty open about that. But if we go through the range, so the lowest easiest barrier to entry is you don't do anything. You choose an off-the-shelf hub, off-the-shelf rim, off-the-shelf spokes, and get one of those three suppliers to even lace the wheel for you. You don't know anything about spoke tension. You don't know anything about anything. They just do everything for you. The next ring up is like maybe a brand where they know a thing or two, and they're like us. Maybe they're like, oh, if I could put that rim with that spokes, that would be great. And so then they'll go out to find things that really meet their criteria. And maybe they say, oh, build me up 2 sets, one with your super light rim and one with your extra light rim, and they'll ride them and they'll compare them and do this stuff like this. And I think that's like kind of the next ladder up, like brands doing stuff like this. And then if you go a ladder up above that, let's say there's a brand that does that, but then they find, oh, this is really good, but at the rear wheel, there's not enough vertical compliance. It's too stiff. Let's take the 24 spoke count down to 21. And the hub factory says, I don't have a 21 spoke hub for this. And it's like, okay, well, can you make me one? And like, okay, we'll make you one, but the MOQ is 500 pairs, and you need to give us, $5,000 R&D fee. And if they think they can push those numbers, then that's what they'll do. So again, this is kind of like, they know what they want, and they've got some money to back it up, but they're probably letting the factory do most of the heavy lifting.
Can I just pause you there, Joe? If you can, I know you probably don't want to piss anyone off. If you can think of a brand that it wouldn't piss them off that's in each category, could you name one? Just so because I don't actually know who fits into what, or is that just a no-go?
It would be difficult because it's
okay.
People will get irked because, in my opinion, it doesn't necessarily matter what rung of this ladder you're on, but for some reason, people think the rung of the ladder is the experts, and so if you say they're not at the top, people are going to get irked. It's not.
That was sort of my point about doesn't matter. You're right. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So it matters to the brand. I don't think it matters. I mean, I'm going to say the Case wheels are good. I mean, they're probably not redesigning hubs. Does it matter?
So this is
it matters in your branding, though, Jesse. Like you look at number 6 is front of mind from me at the moment. Their massive branding is zero gravity hubs. Now I'm not going to ask Joe whether maybe you can tell me, but like produced from single piece of it. So this is like it looks to me like when I go to their website like that this is some zero gravity hub. That's just not off the shelf. There's R&D that's gone into zero gravity.
But there has. It's just that perhaps they haven't done it. It's still a hub CNC'd out from. It's not necessarily a lie.
If you go look at photos of that hub, you can find other brands with the same hub. Like I'll say
Okay.
that. Yeah, like I said, not trying to ruffle too many feathers.
No.
But so let's take
But
it.
you're saying, Jesse, that's not a bad thing. Sorry, go on, Joe.
No, I think that to me, maybe people can't. To me, that seems quite obvious. It's the middle ground where I'm like, I really can't tell. The CRWs for me are an example. The hub looks kind of, and the spokes kind of look generic, but the rim profile, I haven't seen that rim profile elsewhere. So something like the CRWs, I'm guessing it's somewhere in the middle.
Well, I'm very close with CRW, so I don't mind ruffling their feathers because they'll take it on the chin. But CRW, like their design, they're one of all of these brands we've been talking about. I think almost any brand out there, they're one of the few where the carbon spoke actually threads into the hub. Like there's a thread.
Looking at that now.
And they designed that and they have a patent for that. So like when you have this situation and you can check the patent or go on the Chinese patent website, do your stuff, like the patent's in their company name. So when you see something like that, you're like, okay, you did engineer this. And to go off on a tangent, I actually like that approach because, Peak Talk that he's always talking about in his videos, like lots of these brands use the hubs where the carbon spoke is like hooked on the flange. And if the rim was to deform, then it's going to fall off, yada, yada. So having it threaded on the hub is like some safety. But again, I'll tell you where CRW are on the ladder. So CRW on the ladder, they don't have their own hub factory. They do make their own carbon spokes in-house, and they don't make their own rims. But all three are designed by themselves. And even to the point, so the boss of CRW, he used to work at one of the local factories here that was producing frames for one of the big brands, begins with an S. And his thing is like layup, like he's very good at layups. So when you go to one of these carbon rims, we'll pivot to rims for a second. You've got a few choices as well. Number one, you just pick an off-the-shelf rim that they have. Like they'll have the picture of the profile that you all see. Lots of these brands using where it's like a CAD diagram and it tells you the inner width, the outer width, and this that you see lots of people just slap on the website. I think there's a few on Panda Podium as well. So yeah, guilty as charged. So you can just buy those off the shelf. Or step two is you say, okay, I like this shape, but can we change the layup a bit? And like you'll ask them to use more high modulus or more low modulus to try adjust the weight or adjust the ride characteristics a bit. And that'll be cheaper than changing the shape, because if you want to change the shape of the rim, then you have to get them to open a new mold. And so they're going to have a minimum order quantity, and you're probably going to have to pay for the tooling costs as well. But for most brands, like the average wheel engineer, he probably doesn't know that much about carbon layup, or not as much as the rim factory who's doing this like 24/7. So most brands, unless you really, really know what you're doing, lots of the stuff is best left to the factories. Like you can give them like your idea and your targets. Like I want it to be 350 grams and I want it to do this, this, or this. But literally specifying every ply of carbon, like unless you're better than they are at it, then just let them do it kind of thing. So yeah, there are rungs of the ladder, and different brands fall on different rungs, let's say. But if you flip it around to the other side, so we were saying like brands that have their own factories. Let's say there's a brand, they have their own hub factory, they have their own rim factory, yada, yada, yada. Like lots of these brands, they maybe started out as just a rim factory. And in that case, they probably know a lot about carbon layup, but do they know a lot about like wheels and racing and like ride dynamics and stuff like this? So like I think almost like any industry, like any company, it comes down to the people in the company and their expertise and what they know and stuff. And in the Chinese bike industry, in Xiamen as well, like lots of people move between factories. Like previously, I just mentioned the guy at CRW, his X something factory. And again, I know there's another brand that's coming out soon, and the guy from that brand, he's from another big Chinese factory here, and it's all going like round in circles like a merry-go-round.
So this is a new brand coming out, this you're talking about, another one.
Yeah. So
it's not another wheel brand, is it?
Oh, for God's sake.
1,200 grams, 24 internal.
It's another wheel brand, but not steel spokes and not carbon spokes. I'll leave it there.
Oh. Magnesium spokes. Wow.
Something. Invisible spokes.
Invisible spokes.
But yeah, so to go back to the question, it is a huge rabbit hole, like, of which brand is doing what. But does it matter? As what matters is whoever designed your hub knew what they were doing. Whoever machined your hub knew what they were doing, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, if that person was in the brand or in the factory, for the consumer, does it really matter? No, as long as the wheel set's good.
You went to the Magene factory recently.
Yep.
That was insane. Where are they
The
on the
scale
ladder?
is so Magene are pretty clever. Like Magene are clever in that, like, from what I just was talking about, they know what expertise they have, so they'll know what they'll do in-house and what they won't do in-house. Again, I'm not sure what I'm allowed to say, but let's say they have a whole bunch of these CNC machines where, in theory, they could make everything. But there are some things that they don't make because they know other people can make it better. So, why reinvent the wheel when you can just buy this certain part in-house? But everything you saw in the video that you saw them making is basically what they make. And if in my video you saw something that they weren't making themselves, then they probably don't make it themselves. But again, the reason they don't make it themselves is because either they can get it done by somewhere else cheaper or better. Because again, cost is also a big thing. Doing something in-house isn't necessarily cheaper, especially in China, like, just because of economies of scale. If you're just making hubs for just your one brand, your quantities of raw materials and everything may not be that high. Whereas another factory who's making hubs for 20 brands, they can probably sell it to you cheaper than you can make it yourself. So yeah, cost and expertise are probably the two biggest things of, do I do this in-house or do I outsource it? But to add another point to it that I think is an advantage for the local brands, even if you're a local brand that is taking everything off the shelf or, having the factory doing most of the heavy lifting, your advantage over a Western brand is that, like I said, I can get in my car now and I can drive in an hour to so many of these factories and literally sit next to the guy who has SolidWorks open, like drawing the hub, and tell him, oh no, do this, do that. And the speed of development and stuff is just so much quicker than some guy being in America, sending an email to China. Okay, they do their changes. Next day gets sent back because of the time difference. Takes a day. Oh no, I didn't mean that. I meant this because of the language difference. They got it wrong, and the back and forth to just design a hub. But for a Western brand, it's going to take weeks. For someone here, you sit next to the guy doing it, it'll be knocked out in like 2 hours.
And that's kind of why we're seeing the Chinese brands delivering the specs that I suppose we're wanting from the Western brands. Hey, can I just set out a scenario how this plays out in my head? So this is how a Chinese wheel brand works in Chris's brain, right? So they get the reserve wheels. Okay, Chris really likes reserve wheels. So they get them. They all sit around the table. They go, oh, we can make that. And so they literally are trying to replicate this product. Now, whether they know, I don't know exactly where reserve's made or anything, like how sort of interlaced that all is. But in my mind, that's the Chinese R&D essentially, is trying to mimic the mainstream brand as close as possible and tweak it where they can. Is that a scenario that plays out? Is there any truth in that?
I'd say that's more of what the factories do. So lots of the factories here, like, they're big into reverse engineering, if you want to give it a posh name. Yeah, like when I go around the factories here, like, I go into a hub factory and you'll see, the Tactic Racing hub, and everyone else's hub you'll see there, and they'll all be cut in half, and they'll have been tested, this, that, and the other. But like, don't get me wrong, like,
Yes.
I
Oh dear.
again, I can't say, but I went to a brand's headquarters in America this year, yeah, and you see the same thing there. Like, everyone's doing this. It's not just the Chinese. Like, you'd be dumb not to do it. Yeah, you got to see what your competitors doing.
True, but I don't know how many number 6 wheels are cut up in half at the reserve wind tunnel. But anyway, yes, I get your point.
Yeah,
100%.
no. Yeah, I agree. But I'd say this is more something that goes on the factory side. Like, so the factories, they're more into like the reverse engineering and finding it. And then once they learn something, like let's say a Chinese brand reverse engineers, we'll choose an example that's super easy, like the DT Swiss style free hub back in the day. They will then offer this to their brands and say, hey, by the way, we can do DT Swiss free hub now. And the brand will go, oh, you can? Sure, do that for me. So it's probably more of a pushing from the factory rather than a pulling from the brand kind of thing. In general, I definitely say the biggest difference. So I just said the advantages of the Chinese brands is that, the supply chain is here, yada, yada, yada. In my experience, most Chinese brands, the thing that their disadvantage is just the knowledge of bikes and riding, let's say. Like lots of these wheel brand bosses, they're good at physics or they're good at business or they're good at this, that, and the other. And maybe they ride a little bit or something, but loads of them, they don't even ride. Yeah. It's for them, it's just a white good. It's a washing machine, blah, blah, blah. And so if you don't know that much about what makes a good wheel good, etc., then you're not going to really be pushing requirements to the factory.
Are we then in danger with the direction that? Sorry to go on about wheels, but just a little bit more on the wheels. Are we in danger with the wheels of going too far down this wide, deep light? Because the specs get more incredible. I mean, we're probably not far away from a 1,000 gram, 70 mil deep wheel. I reckon we're probably 12 months away. It probably exists at this point, which I would argue could potentially be dog shit to ride. Yes. It's in 99% of circumstances.
Yeah, and so that's a good point, because like I say, the guy doesn't ride, he doesn't understand bikes, but he can look at numbers and he can say, this guy's weighs this much, weights are going down, everyone wants lighter, and he can see internal width going up and think, oh, for some reason now everyone wants freaking 26 mil, 27 mil internal rim width from and it's just, everyone trying to beat everyone to the end and just, it goes crazy. But will that be a wheel you want to ride? We shall see.
I'm going to throw this question at you, Joe, specifically on wheels, that someone sent in on Instagram. They said, the CRW look interesting. I would like to see more testing results, as they don't seem to say what went into their Aero design process other than reducing the number of spokes and using deeper bladed spokes. What do they know or have worked with that the engineers from F1 and huge amounts of wind tunnel, computer modeling, and outdoor testing like Swisside/DT Swiss have missed? Is it just luck, or is there a trade-off somewhere in usability and resilience to the stresses and strains of riding and racing? Interesting question. Essentially, have CRW seemingly made a competitive wheel, or is it just looking like that on the spec sheet? And if they have, how have they done it versus a team of engineers sitting in a room somewhere around the clock in Germany?
Yeah, good question. So let me unpack it a bit. Number one, let's say the difference between F1 engineering aerodynamics and bike wheel aerodynamics is leagues apart. Like this is the greatest trick of Western marketing ever to convince consumers that we are in any way, shape, or form as complex as Formula One aerodynamics. Like, Formula One aerodynamics, you're talking about, winglets on the end of things that are tripping air to make boundaries and stuff. Like, on a bike rim, you go look at anyone's bike rim, you very, very rarely see something that's like a feature. I think the best example I can think of is on the Rovals, the CLX 2s. They have the really wide lip on the front rim, so there's like a neck almost from the tire to the rim. I reckon that is an intentional aerodynamic feature, and lo and behold, Specalized are one of the few brands that actually has a wind tunnel. But apart from this example, you look at almost everyone else's example, and it's just, it's just an aerofoil. And maybe hidden nipples, non-hidden nipples, stuff like this. It does make a difference, but it is not Formula One aerodynamics by any stretch of the imagination. I think most brands are just using CFD at most, like just running it through the computer and seeing what's fast. And then maybe when it's already done, because once you do your CFD, and let's say you're happy with it, and then you open the mold, you do the tooling, you spend $10,000, however many $1,000 on making it, to actually be able to make the first carbon fiber rim. Once you put it in the wind tunnel, who's going to say, oh, that's not as good as we thought, let's go spend another $10,000 on tooling? Or who's going to say, let's just change the yaw angle to the yaw angle that makes us look faster, and then we'll just ship it anyway and say, yeah, it's good, mate. I think that's what 90% of Western brands are doing with their wind tunnel testing, and this is the best wheel, yada, yada, yada. So, yeah, they're just doing the actual R&D is probably just like very basic CFD, which I believe most of, or maybe half of the Chinese brands are doing as well. So I'll say that's one half of it. It's just the Chinese brands don't then do the marketing to back it up with the wind tunnel. I think for lots of the Western brands, the wind tunnel is more marketing than actual R&D. But then to go to the other half of it, I think the other half of it is what I talked about earlier in just that infinite monkeys with infinite typewriters. Someone's going to get it right. Like the shape of a rim, unless you're going to start making like triangles or hexagons or something, like there's very little room to go. And so one thing that I'm fortunate for is that people kind of know my history of promoting other brands and the success that those brands have. So now whenever someone has a new interesting wheel in China, like they'll come to me and, they basically want me to sell their wheels. And the first thing is always like, is it a good wheel? Like, so I'll go out and ride it. I'll test it with the Ghibli Aero sensor, blah, blah, blah. And CRW are one of those examples. Like when I first started Panda Podium, again, Chinese bike industry is very small. I had almost every brand you've ever heard of. They came here and talked to me like, oh, can you sell our wheels? Yada, yada, yada. And the ones that you see on the website now are the ones I said yes to, and the ones that you don't are the ones I said no to. And CRW were like the last in the door. Like I was sick and fed up of wheels. I'd had like 20 samples given to me. Like I'd ridden them all. They were all the same, yada, yada, yada. But CRW were recommended to me by one of the local racing guys. Is an independent racer, so like he chooses what he buys for his bike, as opposed to just like riding what is given. And he was saying the CRWs were great. So yeah, gave them a try, and I loved how they rode. I loved the weight. And I didn't have the Ghibli back then, but the old butt dyno of like, I'm sure Jesse and Chris as well, when you've done X amount of laps in a certain park at a certain wattage, you can just feel when it's faster or slower. Again, we're going to get slated in the comments for this, but whatever, come at me, bro. Hashtag bro science. And yeah, the CRWs just tick the boxes.
You can feel the riding dynamics. Like you can feel crosswind stability like almost straight away, especially if you ride day after day. You notice that within a few laps in Centennial Park. Yeah.
I reckon I've got compliance down to an absolute, like literally I could ride less than 2Ks and I can give you a full compliance report on a wheel. Did you see that Cycling News have done all these tests right this year, Joe? And again, another 12 months without throwing a Chinese frame or wheel set in there. Is it a conspiracy theory? Or is it just I can't believe it's practicality that they're not being included. When I say conspiracy, I mean like, Cycling News, big brand, mainstream, etc. Keep the boys on side. We'll just test the boys' wheels. We won't let them in the door. And yeah, I don't know. Follow-up question is, how do you think that actually go in the tests? But whatever. That's how long is a piece of string.
So I think we're on the edge. I think it's going to happen really soon. So I didn't actually look at the cycling tips thing, but I heard you guys talking about it on the show last week or the week before. I can't remember. And yeah, I couldn't help but chuckling. Like, so I think it is a bit of what you said, like trying to look after the boys and make sure that we're going to keep getting the sponsor money and stuff like this. But I am now seeing more and more people reach out, like from magazines.
Interesting.
Especially when the Chinese group set came up, like I had a bunch of the big traditional media brands reach out to me and ask me to help them get some L2 group sets and stuff. And I think for those big media, it's going to be like who blinks first. Like even Tour magazine, like in the December issue of Tour magazine, like there's even a piece on Chinese products, and they've got Panda Podium and they've got me in there. They interviewed
sick.
me for that piece. So like mainstream quote unquote cycling media is, I think, starting to say, okay, well, more and more consumers are starting to know about it. We can't pull the wool over their eyes anymore. We're going to have to start covering this stuff. Why for that particular test they didn't include any Chinese wheels? Who knows? And what's worse from that than me is when they include like the worst Chinese wheels. Like you have some test and they're just like, oh, quick, we need the Chinese wheel so people don't think we're being biased. And they'll get like some 3-year-old, like whoever paid the most money brand, like horrible set of wheels. And it'll, of course, perform horribly too. But yeah, I'm sure lots of the media guys are watching out there, or anyone who wants to do a wheel comparison test, like send me an email. Like I will happily put you in touch with every brand and get you. I can get my hands on pretty much any Chinese wheel set, I imagine. So yeah, get in touch.
There we go. Cycling News Chinese wheel mega test.
Josh Croxton, get in touch, Josh.
Matt, look, we can give him a reserve and a scope to slip into. Throw him a bone. The rest can all be Chinese wheels.
Yeah.
And like you can ask anyone who have ever sent anything to, like even back in the day, 2019, I was the first person representing a brand to send something to Hambin to test. And I just said, yo, test it. If it's good, say it's good. If it's crap, say it's crap. Don't put any words in people's mouths. So I'm all for testing because that, like, my whole ethos is let's just test everything and let consumers choose what's best for them. So yeah, anyone who wants to do any testing.
It's kind of like that's the last thing to fall here, because I think at this point the Hambini style, what's the quality like? Are they going to disintegrate on impact stuff? I think that's done. We've got beyond that. And now I think it's this thing of, well, how do they actually compare pure performance-wise to something mainstream that's potentially twice its price, that's being raced at the tour? And that's like the last thing to fall. And once that falls, it kind of feels like all bets are off. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I think one thing that these brands know and use to their advantage is that apart from Sir Jesse Coyle, most people can't see Aero, right? So they can always, like, a punter can see the price of a wheel, they can see the weight of the wheel, and they can make a comparison. But the brand can say, oh, well, Aero at Schmero, like, our wheels are the fastest, even though apparently every wheel's brands are the fastest. So this is like the democratization of consumer wheel choices will come when people have more Aero data. And so now I have my Ghibli, I could go out and Aero test every set of wheel I have, and it's something I do want to do, but it's also going to be a can of worms, because what size tires do I use? Like, if I use 25s, everyone will say, oh, but with 32s, the blah, blah, blah is quicker. Which bike do I use? If I use a bike where the down tube hugs the wheel, someone's going to say, oh, but the SL8 doesn't do that. So, like, yeah, unfortunately, there is no way for everyone to Aero test a wheel on their bike with their tires before they buy it. And that's going to be used as an advantage for brands with big marketing budgets that can claim that they have the most Aero superior wheel 100%. Set in the world.
You did right.
But I do want to add something, like, because obviously I'm preaching the praises of the Chinese brands. I still do think lots of Western brands have some of the best wheels in the world. Like, I really rate the Syncross SL wheels, like, never ridden them, so, armchair engineering, but they look like a great pair of wheels on paper. Now, do I think no Chinese brand could make a better wheel? Not necessarily. What I think the issue is, the actual production cost of something like the Scope wheels or the Syncross wheels, the production cost is super high, right? Because you've got 3D printed titanium hubs, or you've got like complicated spokes that are attached to the rim, stuff like this. So increased production costs means increased retail prices, yeah? Let's say even you want to make a tiny, tiny bit of money, you're looking at about $2,500, $3,000. Is anyone going to buy a Chinese wheel that expensive. So I feel like Chinese brands, the biggest limit to them right now is that people can't accept a $2,500, $3,000 wheel set. Like, I love to imagine what a $3,000 Chinese wheel set would be if they can just use any carbon they want. They can use any materials they want for the hub, all this stuff. They could pack a wheel that I reckon would be really, really world beating. But if no one buys it, no one's going to make it, right? Because you're just going to lose money.
In terms of some of the manufacturing, so we're talking about like the R&D on the actual product, like using a lip on the down tube for aerodynamics, right? But the actual manufacturing techniques, like I've seen a bit of chat about this latex bladder molding thing for like frames and wheels and stuff. Who designs that? Who came up with that? Is that a Chinese factory that's gone, this is a better process, or is that a Western influence in terms of how things are made?
It's funny that you chose the latex molding, like the EPS molding thing, because at this point, I swear I've been in like 6 factories that all claim that they were the first to do it. Like even within China, like it's every factory tells you like, oh, I was the first to do this or this. And you're like, I thought the other guy was supposed to do this. And again, sometimes what that is that like person A used to work at factory X and then he moves to factory Y. And so when you go to factory Y, he'll say, I was the first to do this. But when you go to factory X, they'll say, we were the first to do this. So you get this thing where like they were maybe all in the same factory at one point. So they all claim that they had a part of inventing it. And the first brand that this factory used it for was maybe Western brand S. And so then Western brand S will say that they invented it or they pioneered it, let's say. There's lots of words that you can use in marketing to make it sound like you invented it when you didn't invent it, when you use the word pioneer or any other word that it doesn't mean I invented it, but it just means I was the first to knock it out of the park. But to go back to your question, I think it's hard to put a number on it, but I'm going to go for half and half in terms of factory innovations that are led by overseas brands versus factory innovations which are led by people local in the factories. But one tricky thing is most Western brands, the factory that produces for them probably also produces for several other brands. And if the brand has a new idea or new technique, it's very risky for them to teach the factory how to do it because the factory will then go offer this to their other clients.
That was kind of my point about the wheel. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the clever brands, they'll have something in there where like, yo, I'm going to teach you to do this, but for the first year, you can only use it for our frames. Or for the first 2 years, you can only use it for our frames. And the factories also have to be very careful. Like they might take the idea and kind of change it a bit and give it to another brand so the original brand can't get angry. But again, then it's a numbers game because if the original brand with the idea is one of your big clients, you don't want to annoy them and send them to another factory. But if the brand with the original idea was one of your smaller clients, then of course you want to take this idea and tell it to your big clients because if your small clients leave you, you don't care because you've just helped your big client get a new thing. So this is a big bag of worms. And this is also what, from a brand point of view, really hurts small brands and stops small brands from being able to innovate. Because as soon as you make an innovation, the factory's probably going to give it to everyone else. And then,
great point.
Yeah. And then the big brands that can protect themselves. So there are some factories in Xiamen which will only produce for one brand. And that way, I think we've talked about it before, like the Athos and the SL8 are made in a factory here that's not owned by the brand, but they only make for that brand. And then that brand can confidently come to this factory, teach them to do everything because they know they're not going to be making for anyone else. But engineers can leave that factory and go work for another factory, and then we're in a bit of trouble, and we're going to see people copying stuff and stuff like this. But that's the best way to keep it safe. But you can imagine these factories are giant. They are huge. The numbers you need to tell this factory only make for me and don't make for anyone else is crazy. So yeah, this makes it a barrier to entry for the bike game for lots of Western brands. I'm sure there's people watching this who have lots of experience with bikes and stuff, or they have their small bike brand and they're wishing they could innovate more, but they just can't because it's a numbers game.
You look like a brand like that Chapter 2, that bike that was just launched. And you're like, they probably make 200 frames. Just throw a number out. But what's the point of them spending, hundreds of thousands of dollars on R&D when the factory will do just like you said? Like, well, we couldn't really give a shit that this is your technology. We're going to tell Scott about it. Next minute, the order to do the exact same thing is times 400. So, yeah. Interesting. That latex bladder molding thing, kind of overrated, isn't it? Like, does it matter? Do we need that technology?
I've had a few brands come to me with like handlebars, for example, and say, we're the first people to use latex molding on the inside of our handlebar. But it was like a 450 gram handlebar. I'm like, who cares? Like, no, look how smooth the inside is. I'm like, mate, it's a tank. I don't care how smooth it is on the inside. Like,
yeah.
So again, lots of these things is the people pushing it, not really understanding what it is or the advantages of it. But you also see this from the other side. So there are some technologies as well, and you see this a lot with the Chinese brands. Like, the engineer who works for the brand has this really cool idea, and it is like impressive, like from an engineering point of how to do it. But from a consumer point of view, like, we don't care. But it just gets pushed because the marketing people in the company, they don't ride bikes either. So the engineers say this is cool and they just push it. One example I can randomly think of is the Majin head units. They have this function where your phone can download a list of what satellites the GPS should be able to see, because obviously your phone knows where it is. And it pushes this list to your head unit over Wi-Fi, so then you can get a satellite signal quicker on the GPS when you're outside. And like, okay, technically that's pretty impressive. Maybe no one has done it before, but they pushed this as a really strong marketing point. But like, no one really cares because on my Garmin or my Wahoo or whatever, it gets a signal in like 5-10 seconds anyway. So do I care if 5 seconds goes to 1 second? No, I don't. So you'll see this a lot, like. So EPS, latex inner molding, I think is one example, and you see all of these other buzzwords as well. And yeah, you got to learn to just put your filter on and take out the chaff.
When you saw the new Colnago launched, how does that play out in reality in the factory? Will Colnago? They don't own their own factory, from what I understand. Will they have like a patent then over that sort of design? Will they have a special staff to put this together?
Yeah, so I'm not a big Colnago fanboy. I own one, but it's a steel one. But like, from my understanding, like, Colnago are actually pretty OG with carbon fiber, right? Like, I think Enzo Ferrari taught Ernesto Colnago how to make carbon fiber, and they had their own clave in Italy and stuff like. Yes, stuff like this. Like, and again, they outsourced to Asia. Now, was it because of price or was it because of expertise? And like, they know Asia can make a better carbon frame than Italy can now. I don't know, because supercars are still being knocked out of Italian autoclaves just fine, like your Zondas or whatever. So I guess it's just a money thing at the end of the day. But when you get purchased by venture capital, that's what's going to happen. Anyway, sorry, segue, back on topic. Yeah, so from my understanding, and again, I have no inside information, this is all just allegedly, but yeah, Colnago are using a factory that produces for several brands, and yeah, they'll just give them the design, they'll work with them, and they'll make it for them, and NDAs and all this stuff. But I think on the Colnago frame, there's nothing from the manufacturing perspective, which is pretty crazy. I'm sure the guy in Italy kind of like sketched the frame and gave it to the factory, and the factory were like, "Oh, this is going to be a pain in the ass to make." And but I'd assume, and again, I could be wrong, I'd assume most of the heavy lifting of making that shape structurally viable was handled by the factory. Like, maybe Colnago gave them some targets, like head tube stiffness, bottom bracket stiffness, but the actual layup of where every ply goes, I'd say Colnago are on the edge of how their level of expertise is, in my opinion. But I'm guessing they left the heavy lifting to the factory, which again is not a bad thing because the factory probably knows more than you.
Yeah, because we were talking about the photo they had in the press release with all the cables running through it to measure the pressure at like 100 different points, blah, blah, blah. That thing, I think, was just 3D printed. That wasn't actually a bike. So at that stage, Joe, I'm guessing that actually hadn't been... There's no mold for that yet, right? That's just been 3D printed to test the speed of the frame.
But do you know, there was an interesting thing about that picture. I know the picture you're talking about. And this is a very interesting rabbit hole as well. And so on that frame, on that picture, if you look at the crank, it's an unbranded Sky Pivot crankset. One of the cranks carbon cranks that we sell here, like a Chinese crankset, yada, yada, yada. Now, the history of this is that crankset was designed by a Chinese guy called Philip 11. That's his name he goes by. He also worked with Colnago a few years ago to make a concept bike, and like he helped them design it, or he designed it with them. Details I'm not sure of, but so there's definitely some interesting stuff here because everyone assumes that it's the Chinese people doing the copying and like the Italians doing the fancy designing and stuff. But if you look, I was surprised when they let that
I can see that it's not a Shimano crank in that photo with the bike in the wind tunnel. It's as you said, it's fun.
Yeah.
What's
That's
that
interesting.
doing on
there?
So we've got some
and there's
Chinese...
a super record group set on there, or campy for some reason.
So look, there's lots of small details. I didn't notice this. One of my credit to my colleague Tom, he noticed this, and he when we saw those pictures too. So credit to him for that one. But like when you look under the skin, like there's always lots of these interesting connections going on. Philip 11, this guy, to go back to it, he's actually one of the designers behind a whole bunch of the popular Chinese products you see, like the G Major gravel frame is one of his creations. That Sava Dream Maker was one of his creations. Like all of these weird, like out there, pretty pushing the envelope Chinese things that you see, he's behind a lot of them. Like lots of the brands go to him, hire him to design stuff for him. So the Colnago, like I said before, he worked with Colnago to do a concept bike. I'll get some pictures and send to Chris so he can put it in because I'm not sure what the concept bike was either. But so interesting stuff going on. Like who's actually doing the R&D on this stuff is a question mark.
Is someone paid more in a Specalized factory than a Tavella factory? The hard-hitting questions in the notes.
I could
I don't know.
It's quite funny. I can just open like the local like job seeking app and look at the names of the factories and see how much they're offering for the carbon layup people. It's probably the same, to be fair. It's probably the same. But economies of scale, the bigger factories can get stuff done cheaper, and they definitely have more strict management, which is good for consumers because obviously your frame's going to be of a higher quality. But workers, there's probably more strict management means you don't get to slack as much on the job, right? I think everyone can relate to that.
Where's Tavella on the scale? They make frames, they have a wheel brand, they make their own handlebars, which look unique. They look similar to the EXS, but they're definitely different. Are they a full-on proper factory, or
again? So I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good friends with Tavella, so they won't mind me ruffling feathers either. So Tavella are super interesting. So again, a pretty young brand, but lots of the expertise within that brand came from another brand. Frames, they don't build their own frames, but they do design their own frames. And they're probably one of the brands where it's like, they'll tell the frame the targets of what they'll tell the factory the targets of what they want, but they'll literally go to the factory and watch the factory doing stuff. And, so they've got that advantage there. But are they saying where every ply of carbon will go? I'm going to say no. When they do have an issue, I know very early with their batches, like the prototypes, the seat post clamp area was failing, and so like their own internal person told the factory, like, add some more 3K around the back of here to stop it cracking. So, they know what they know, but they also know that the factory knows more of them for most things. So they're one of these brands. But they do have their own in-house rim factory. They build their own rims in-house. They don't do all of their own rims because, again, economies of scale, and they know that other people can probably do better and cheaper than they do. So on the scale that we're talking about, just Tavelo are pretty high up there, you know. So this is interesting because back in the day, I remember when the Aero came out and the Attack came out as well. Like, people were saying they've seen the same bike with a different logo on it. So, it's just an open mold frame, blah, blah, blah. So if we go down the rabbit hole, Tavelo is the brand. Now, Tavelo is owned by a company called Qixing. Now, Qixing is like the parent company. They have another OEM, like, outsourcing partner company called Adapt. Now, Adapt is the company that was offering these frames that looked like the Aero and the Attack. And everyone was like, oh, look, it's just an open mold frame. But if you went on the Adapt website, you scroll to the bottom and go to the, like, contact us and look at the address, and then go to the Tavelo website, do the same thing. Oh, look, the address is exactly the same office and exactly the same building because it's the same company. So
that was funny. But Qixing or whatever it is, the parent company, that's not a factory.
They own a rim factory.
But not a frame factory.
Correct. They do not own the factory.
Okay. There's way more levels than I thought.
There's only one person who owns it all.
Yeah, so people probably think this is interesting too. Like, these open mold companies, they're not necessarily factories. They're just like OEM partners. Because
I'm so confused. All right.
Oh, right. So there's another layer.
So you go to this company who's like an OEM, and it's like, this is my frame manufacturer, but they're not. They're just they're like another semi middleman, but they're doing engineering, right? Like, they're just making the product.
These are commonly called agents. Is the phrase that gets used to them. They get either called agents or trading companies. So these agents or trading companies, it's kind of like the brands in that some of them are doing a lot of it themselves, but some of them are just a middleman. And again, is that a good thing or a bad thing is exactly the same pros and cons as the brands. So these trading companies, if you find a trading company that has its own factory, then they're just going to pump you stuff. And if the factory makes a bad batch, then they're just going to pass it on to you. But if the agent or the trading company in the middle has several factories that it gets frames from, then they can have, some play them off of each other, get you a better price, or they're more likely to be on your side. So lots of these agents and trading companies, they try to make it look, because all of these guys have websites with marketing as well. It's just not aimed at consumers, it's aimed at brands. But they'll try and make it look like they're engineering and pioneering things as well. Whereas in fact, they probably don't even own a factory or anything. But again, is that an advantage? Is that a disadvantage? We can refer to what we talked about before.
Do you want to take that maybe just into the price creep that seems to be going on with the products? I think Tavelo is sort of a good example of that, in the sense that it's starting to, how did you describe it, Jesse? Is this the third iteration, or there was like a wave?
I did think it was third wave. You're right, except they haven't. My classification of the third wave was that it's been independently tested, and the Tavelo still hasn't made it over to Silverstone or somewhere to be independently tested. So technically, it hasn't made what I've originally set out to. But it's got more. I guess there's more people ride. There's more aggressive marketing. I guess there's more people riding them.
The Chinese price creep thing, I think it's interesting. It's pretty deep. So you still have some brands that are still offering the value bargain stuff. Like, you can still go on AliExpress, and if you want to buy a $300 to $400 frame set, no one's taking that away from you. Now, these other brands that, Chinese frame brands that we've known for a few years now, seeing their prices going up, I'm on the fence about that. If your product is getting better, then I don't mind the price going up. But if seemingly the product is still a 1,000 gram frame, which I know Chris thinks a 1,000 gram frame is acceptable, but for me, no. I want 3-digit frames, not 4-digit frames. But yeah, so 1,000-gram frames and the price going up, for me, it doesn't sit too well with me. Like, so, as a retailer, I, in theory, have motivation for prices to go up, because if I'm working on a profit margin percentage, then consumers buying for more price, I get to get more money. But if the prices get so high that we price ourselves out of the market, then that's zero money. So lots of these brands, before they launch a product, they'll come to me and talk to me about the price and stuff and what price I think would be acceptable. Like, I'm definitely trying to encourage them to keep the prices low. But because they've spent so long building this frame and designing it, they think it's the dog's danglers, so trying to convince them to keep the prices down is pretty hard. But
I don't know, I'll speak for you as well, Chris, but we want competing products.
Exactly. So
if all we have choice of is WinSpace SLCs, the market's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah. So if we look back at the other side, so let's look at I think Seeker are a good example of an expensive Chinese frame. I think there's 3 frames which I'll put on their own kind of level these days in China. I'll say one is the Seeker Spear. I'll say the other is the in-color Entropy Speedster, which I don't think has much awareness in the West, but they're one of the brands who also went to Silverstone with Aero Coach and yada yada yada. And I'd say the other is the Quick Pro. Why do I put these 3 on the same tier? Just because for the Quick Pro, it's probably just the construction of it, the weight, stiffness to weight of it is off the chart. And for the other 2, I'll probably say the weight is very impressive, probably not as impressive as the Quick, but their design is more impressive. So, the Seeker Spear has the wind eye, I think they call it, the little cutouts for the whatever shenanigans it is, which was verified in the Silverstone wind tunnel. And like I said, the Entropy Speedster, which is a very unknown frame in the West at the moment, is also Aero Coach Silverstone wind tunnel verified. So these 3 frames are all $2,000, or in the case of the Seeker, $2,800. I don't know what the retail is these days on the top of the line one. And as we were talking about earlier with the wheels, I think that's a good thing, right? Because if that wasn't that expensive, they wouldn't have been able to take it to Silverstone. They wouldn't have been able to have Aero Coach do some R&D. If the Quick Pro didn't cost so much, they wouldn't be able to use so much high modulus carbon fiber, and we'd all be stuck with 1,000-gram frames still. So I think it's easy for people on the internet to get in the comment section and say, "Oh, you've sold out." I remember when you made frames for $1,200, blah blah blah. Yeah, but those frames were 1,000-gram frames. You want them to make 600-gram frames, they're going to be more expensive. They're not. I'd prefer if the brand kept the option for the cheaper frame still. Don't change the whole brand. Still keep the affordable option, because then you have the car that can say no one's forcing you to buy it. If you still want my $1,200 frame, I still have my $1,200 frame. So yeah, I like that brands are pushing the envelope and giving themselves the freedom to see what they can do with a higher budget. But I also hope they keep the affordable options in their lineup.
I had not seen this in-color Entropy Speedster before. This is very interesting. Are you going to be selling this one?
Yeah. So I'm barking up their tree, because at the moment they can't even keep up with demand in China. So they're we don't even want to touch overseas. And so yeah, I don't want a repeat of Seeker either, because Seeker was a thing where Chris has talked about it many times. Yeah, we don't want vaporware bikes, right? I've been burnt twice by promoting something and getting all hyped for it, and then it never materializes. And if you go into my Instagram DMs, how many DMs I have saying when am I gonna get the Seeker? It's ha. Yeah, it's almost a joke at this point. And even though they can't, so I don't want to pick out any particular brand and pick on them in particular, but you can't supply a product. According to GC, allegedly, they're refunding people who placed orders for frames. But then at the same time, you go into Ruler Live and you're sending frames to David Arthur. What's the point? Send those frames to paying punters.
That made me so angry when I saw that video. So angry. Yeah. there's over 24 pre-orders in Australia through the retailer here that have been refunded in the last few months because there's just no attempts to even fulfill the orders next minute. Like, what are we doing? And I mean, yeah, I don't want to go too much into it, but yeah, I feel partially responsible for that because there I am, bloody losing my shit over that bike at Eurobike. I think it was like the first bike I talked about and all that sort of stuff, and I'm being sold the dream by it. And is that because, not, you don't have to answer if you want, but is that because they've got a domestic market that they're looking after first, or is it just they're not really ready for market?
I've been burnt with a brand before of hyping it up and never materializing, which is why for the quick pro stuff, I literally didn't launch the video until my warehouse just across this corridor was full of the frames. Like, I don't want to get burnt twice. I want everything just, when we start getting hyped for this, I want it to be there. Which is why when Jesse Coyle starts going like, "Oh, but have you seen this ER1?" I'm like, Jesse, be quiet. Do not start hyping this up. Like,
I've seen. Look, there's now marketing videos of that one. I was going to bring it up, but I'll leave it then.
No, it's fine. So,
tell me when the room's full of them, and I'll talk about the new. Is that released now? Because someone sent me a video of it. It must be on the forum somewhere.
So this is your job.
If it's on a forum, it's released.
As a cycling journalist, this is totally your job. Like, but yeah, my job is to stop my Instagram being full of people asking me, "When's this coming out? When's this coming out?" But the ER1 is basically on the same arc that the AR1 was on, just like with like, I'd say a 6-ish month delay. So we have the Conti team guys race it first, and then we do some more consumer testing, and then blah, 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 before we finally offer it up to consumers. Now, of course, because... Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, can you launch it with a grainy photo of like the team car and like have then like GC Performance be like, "I think this is the new," and then we'll do oh my God, and it's a full setup, like just grainy photo release. That's the new bike.
It'll be a human centipede thing. We'll talk about GC talking about a grainy photo sent from a team camp somewhere. Yeah, we're like fourth down the line.
Yeah, we'll get the FOMO going on. But yeah, the ER1, sorry, it is coming. I'd say probably because Chinese New Year messes with everything. That's coming up in a month or two, so that like basically just pauses everything. So I think it's going to be on the other side of the ER1, but totally different beast to the AR1. Obviously, the AR1 is like your all-rounder kind of bike, and then the ER1 is more just your dedicated aero bike. And like I say, I ride with the guys in our team quite a lot, so I'll talk to them about the differences between the two, because the marketing for these stuff, it's usually me who ends up writing it. Like, so Quick, they have their own domestic marketing department, but the way you market something in China is very different to the way you market something in the West. For me, my job as a marketer, I think my job is just like to communicate the features of this bike so the consumers can choose the right product, basically. So I talk a lot with the guys on the team who've raced the AR1 and have raced the ER1, because I want to know their opinion of like what the difference is between the two, yada, yada, yada. And so then in the marketing, I can push them both towards the kind of people who would like a bike like that. I mean, like I said in the AR1 review, that bike is unforgivably, like, you'll chatter your teeth out stiff. But some people, including me, like that kind of bike. Like, I like it to feel like a fast bike. So, yeah, working with the team on stuff like that these days. Of course, I've have ER1s that I can ride and make up my own decisions as well. But me, a 50-ish kilo noodle watts person, can't really give a good analysis for a big, heavy watt guy. So
we've got to get you on the creatine, Joe. Jeez, we've got to come on. We got to bump that up, I reckon. Just a good strength program, bit of creatine, not too much, just enough to fill up the muscles. I reckon we'll be good. We'll have you on the Aero bike in 2026.
I'm on the raspberry diet Pepsi to try keep the weight down.
Speaking of Chinese teams riding, no, speaking of teams riding Chinese bikes, it's a better segue.
Yes, that's
Good
the
segue.
Yeah, the X-Lab, because this is a bit of a mystery to us. When this was announced, both Jesse and I kind of looked at each other and went, "Who lab?" And we kind of thought we had a pretty good understanding of what's going on over there. Do you want to maybe just give a little background into these guys?
Sure. So they're a brand that I don't have much of a relationship. So everything I say about them is hearsay and rumor. And I have to say this because in China, libel laws and freedom of speech are a lot stricter than in Australia. And my YouTube channel is a British entity, so take it up with them. But when I do say this allegedly and apparently, make sure you don't cut it out of the video because I literally have to say this so I don't get
Fair enough.
legal notice.
Thank you for reminding me. That's a good point.
You can defect
Because
to
I've had-
Australia if you need to. We'll have you over here. We've got space for you.
Yeah, plan B. Yes, when people see me say allegedly or apparently, it's just to cover my own ass. If it's a brand that I know, like CRW or Tavella, like I'll say anything because they're probably not going to sue me. But
Come at me.
any brand that I'm not that close with, I have to be more careful. Anyway, so X-Lab is kind of like the S-Works division of XDS. XDS is Shidasheng. They're a Chinese brand that they've been in the game for a long, long time. When I first came to China, road bikes weren't very popular. Everyone was riding mountain bikes. Like even on the roads, they were riding mountain bikes because even when I came to China just 15 years ago, the quality of road surface in China was pretty poor. So people were like, I'm going to ride a road bike. Fast forward now, the roads are pristine, like yada, yada, yada. Everyone's on road bikes, etc. But yeah, XDS are old school. They've been making frames themselves. Like they have frame production facilities and they have complete bike assembly facilities. So they are an absolute powerhouse in the Chinese bike industry. Now, they also OEM for some of the big brands. Again, this is all what I've heard allegedly, but an American brand, 4-letter word, begins with a T, like they apparently makes lots of stuff for them. And so back in the day, they were definitely happy just to do lots of OEM stuff for the overseas. And then for the Chinese market, they were selling like a lot of $500 like entry-level aluminum road bikes and mountain bikes was kind of their bread and butter. Now, rumor has it, the boss of the company, obviously he's very rich, very successful, so he pays for his son to go get a nice education in America. So the guy, his son is like Western thinking, Westernly educated. He comes back to his father and it's like, yo, I've got this great idea. We can really push the brand up. We can come out with this X-Lab. It will be more higher end, yada, yada, yada. And I think he's the guy who's pushing this more modern way of thinking. Now, the question mark that I don't know is their intention to go into the Western market with this, or are they just doing this to help sell more stuff in China? I think it's the latter because these factories, especially if you've got a big OEM client, such as the one I just talked about, you do not want to step on the toes of those brands. Like, look at Merida. Like, Merida are in the world tour, but you can't buy a Merida in America, I believe it is. And again, if you read between the lines, Merida own 49% shares or 51% shares in Specalized, is it?
One way or the other. Yeah.
You can imagine there's some things going on there. Like, I'm not going to come here and sell cheaper bikes when you guys can just sell more expensive bikes. Like, why would I take sales away from my own customers? So maybe there's some stuff going on with that in that, the factory doesn't want to step on the toes of its Western OEM brands. So maybe this whole getting into Astana is just to help them sell bikes here. Now, at the end of this year, a few months ago, I saw photos of Mark Cavendish in the factory in Huizhou, which is a small city next to Shenzhen. This one city called Huizhou has like 3 huge factories. One of them is the UCC factory. One of them is the Quick Pro factory. And then, sorry, not UCC, XDS. UCC is another brand. And another huge factory. They're all in this city called Huizhou. And I saw pictures of Mark Cavendish and other people from Astana like in the factory here. And at that point, it wasn't confirmed whether or not Cavendish would be retiring next year.
He did after he saw the bikes.
Shots fired. Shots fired. But he's definitely one of the riders who has big marketing clout in China. Like Chris Froome, Cavendish, and Sagan are probably like the 3 most popular riders, I'd say, in China, which is why you see like Chris Froome endorsing iGPS Sport in China, but you don't really see much of it outside of China. It's like 20 years ago when lots of Hollywood celebrities were doing these like weird Japanese commercials, which we never saw overseas. But then like some people started leaking them and everyone was like, oh no, facepalm. It's the same kind of thing happening in China. But to go back to the original question, who are X-Lab, who are XDS? Yeah, that's the brief history. Now, I've tried to open dialogue with them before too, like, because I think some of their products look pretty impressive. I'm like, I've got tens of thousands of customers and who would all love your products. How about we sell some? And like, I get past like the overseas department says, oh, you're based in China, so the domestic department has to deal with you. And I get strung over to that department and they say, oh, but you're selling overseas. So really it's the overseas department. Basically, they don't want to talk to me. And the vibes I get from that is that they don't really want to sell overseas.
Stepping away from what you just said, that's kind of mind-blowing to think that this, and very insular of me probably to think this, but that this brand is sponsoring a world tour team, investing in a world tour team to sell bikes domestically in China, to move the needle domestically in China being the priority. Like, that's a bit of a shift of thinking for me, definitely, which is, I don't know, neither good nor bad to hear, but certainly not something I thought. Maybe that was clearly that's my bias in it. And so the Chinese domestic market is, so I think we asked you this question last time, engaged somewhat then in professional cycling, or at least a version of it that occurred 10 years ago?
Yeah. Obviously there's a spectrum of how much people watch or pay attention to pro road cycling, right? On average, I'd say if you go on a road bike group ride here, I'd say the average attention or viewership of World Tour racing is a lot lower than in Australia or America or in Europe, but it definitely exists, and apparently exists enough to the point where they think having Astana riding their bikes will help to move the needle. I mean, you see it also quite a lot, in Formula One. You'll see random sponsors on an F1 car that you've never even heard of, and maybe it's just on there for the Chinese market. I think we saw it at the World Cup as well. The World Cup this year, you see random stuff on there, and you're like, huh. And it's just a numbers game, right? So let's say in Europe, 50% of the people watch the World Cup. Okay, that's a lot of people. In China, only 10% of people watch the World Cup. It's probably more people, so it's just that numbers game. Now, long term, if I was XDS, if I was X-Lab, I would tread on the toes of those clients. And this is a conversation I think we had a little bit before too. In 5 years' time, 10 years' time, I don't think that many frames are going to be made in China. It's all going to be in Vietnam and the rest of Southeast Asia. 2 reasons for that. And again, this is going to be a can of worms. Reason number 1 is just prices in China are rising because, standard of living is going up. And the factory workers want more money, et cetera, et cetera. And number 2 is things like our yellow-haired friend, Mr. Trump, and his tariffs and stuff. Like, how much longer stuff can be made in China? If I have this Chinese brand, this Chinese factory, if I don't make a brand within the next 5 years.
How are the potential tariffs going to affect Panda Podium?
So that's a good follow-up question. I think the whole of the the whole of the world, it has a big question mark on this, right? Like, will he, won't he? We shall see. We'll play it by ear. Like, obviously, I hope it doesn't have any negative effects, but if it does, there are plenty of other countries out there that, Australia is our second biggest market these days. So
Yeah, but everything would get more expensive. I don't see why it would. It wouldn't just discriminate against. Most of the frames would be coming from China anyway. But unless there's ways to get around the tariffs by sending it around the world and then coming in the back door somewhere, I don't see how it doesn't affect everything.
So the way that some brands have been getting around this is that those tariffs only apply to mainland China. So some brands will take their frames from mainland China and then assemble them into complete bikes in Taiwan and then ship them from Taiwan to America, and then there is no tariffs. So the bike industry always has ways, or every industry, let's say, has ways to get around these things, and we'll see what ends up transpiring. But yeah, we shall see. This geopolitics, like, we don't want this to turn into the Joe Rogan show, but yeah, we'll leave it there.
So how is Panda Podium going, Joe? It's been how long's it been going now? We were excited when it got launched a few years ago. How are things tracking? How are sales?
Yeah. It's very, like, sales-wise, better than expected. Like, everything's great. Obviously, just finished Black Friday. That was a crazy time of year. Like, it's a rush. Like, I'm the same as lots of people. The same endorphins that set off when you get a notification on social media. Like, the same thing happens when you get a sale on, like, your WooCommerce app or whatever. So Black Friday is very good for, like, the dopamine hits. But then when Black Friday is over, like, you're kind of in this, what do I do now? So everything's been going great. I think progress has been not slow, but just different to what I thought. Like, there's lots of projects that I want to get going that just haven't got going yet just because we're too busy selling stuff, basically. But it's a good problem to have, to be too busy. But yeah, there's definitely some things that I want to get going that have been slower than we want. Like, I know you guys, you are always preaching that, until Panda Podium can offer complete bikes, etc., it's not going to be mainstream. Like, that is obviously something that has been on my roadmap since day one, and we are getting closer and closer. But yeah, just a finite number of people and resources and hours in the day, but definitely something we want to get going. So I have, like, my feature list of things that I want to get coming on the website, and there's a few things that will be coming soon. Like, say, now that Black Friday is over, I can start working on those. I want to work on some cool tools. Like, I want a little questionnaire where it asks you some questions and then recommends you a wheel set. So, like, there's different levels of questions you can ask depending on, like, the knowledge of the consumer. Like, if I was asking Jesse, I just ask him, like, what internal rim width would you want? If I was asking someone, like, a bit more amateur, I might say, what size tires do you like to ride? And if I was asking someone even more amateur, I'd be like, how is the quality of the roads around you? So trying to take these answers and turn them into, like, wheel recommendations and stuff is something that I'm trying to get going. Because, yeah, our advantage, I'd say, as Panda Podium is that we have all of these wheels to choose from. But the disadvantage is that for consumers, it can be a bit overwhelming, right? Like, they all look the same. It's all just, which one do I choose? So I want to try and make it easier for consumers to find the best wheels for them. So we'll probably start with wheels, and then if that works, we'll put this tool onto other things as well.
What are the top selling products? And, like, are there any trends that you're seeing?
It's pretty interesting. I'd say our average consumer is, like, the tip of the triangle in terms of very professional, in terms of they know what they want. They're pretty geeky. They're pretty nerdy. We did a few questionnaires back in the day. Like, the average one of them, they have, multiple bikes, etc. So the stuff that we're selling a lot of may not truly reflect the state of the cycling industry at large, but it is surprising to me, like, how quickly people get on the new trends of, narrower handlebars and stuff. Maybe after this chat, I'll go get some data of the average width handlebar that we're selling now. But I think it's definitely, like, if you take an average, I reckon it's like 370 something mil or like 382 mil, like that kind of ballpark.
Yeah, wow.
So we're definitely at the forefront of all of these trends. Like and crank length is the same. Like, you know, I could go find the average crank length that we're selling these days, and it's probably like sub 170 mil as well. So yeah, it's really interesting to see how quickly consumers are getting at the spear front of all of these changes. In terms of products, wheels are always a big one for us. Like, I think we're becoming like one of the de facto places just to go and ask about Chinese wheels. Lots of the wheels we sell, like number 6 wheels, you know, you can pick them up on the number 6 website, or you can pick them up from us. It's the same price, yada, yada, yada. But I think people appreciate that if they come to us, they'll get some impartial advice about those wheels, because number 6's thing is obviously they're very wide wheels. Is that a good thing for you and the roads that you ride on? Obviously, number 6 will tell you it is, and they're the best for everyone. But we're more impartial, maybe, so we'll tell you, oh, well, if you're always riding on narrower tires on nice roads with higher pressures, maybe you should go for the fast sports or the CRWs, etc., etc. So it's nice to.
Do you have a clear wheel set that's the highest seller, or is that not something that's that
the CRWs? The CRWs are probably the
50/60s
for the year, definitely that. Oh, which model? That's a good question. So you can actually go like, again, like you were just saying, is that something we won't want to share? Blah blah blah. I do spend a lot of time having to be careful what I say, because there are some copycat Panda podiums popping up. But if you go on my website, on the main page, you scroll down, there's literally a best sellers section. And that section
so I'm on most
legit.
popular by wheel set, and the CRW 50/60 is top of the tree. In fact, it's CRW 1, 2, 3, and then Fast Sports 4.
Yep, and that's legit data. So yeah, you can look at that what you will. Yeah, so my balancing act these days, I have like 3 things to balance. Like, number 1 is trying not to let my competitors like have all of my knowledge and connections and blah blah blah. But I also want to come on podcasts like this and share all of my knowledge too. You know, like it's like, oh, do I talk about the Entropy Speedster, or you know, someone else is going to go hit them up and try to get it on their website, blah blah blah, or do I keep it until it's in my warehouse? Like, whatever. Like, I'd rather just, you know, make this useful for consumers. My belief is make the site and make my platform and make my knowledge useful for consumers. And then hopefully when the time does come for them to buy a wheel set, they'll buy it from us. So that's the kind of ethos I have on that. But yeah, CRW is number 1. The Fast Sports wheels have been selling really well though. Like the new Fast Sports wheels, they've only been out for a short period of time. And for them to already be, I think you just said number 4 in the rankings is obviously pretty impressive.
It's so light.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's so light.
You know, what's it called? Wiggle had like Prime and DHB and stuff. Would you ever just go, fuck, sick of speccing all these different things. I'm just going to make a Panda Podium wheel set with all, because I know every factory and every engineer and everything, and just pick the best parts and just do your own in brand.
At this point, you know, I've ridden a lot of wheels. I know a lot about wheels. Again, I know all the factories. And because I'd be going straight to the factories myself, I could offer them at a really good price as well, because there's not the brand in the middle, yada, yada, yada. So obviously I'd make money. I'd make more money than selling other people's wheels. So I've got motivation to do it as well. But the thing is, like, I don't want to just, for me, for my riding style at the moment, for example, the CRW is the perfect wheel. Like, I can't think of a change I'd want to make to the CRW wheel. Like, maybe change the logo or, you know, change some stuff like that. So for me, just like basically copy the CRW and then undercut them on price, like just so I can make a bit more money. It doesn't help consumers. Like, it's not bringing anything to the table. Now, if I have an idea for a wheel set that no one wants to do, for example, like rim brake wheels, everyone's abandoned rim brake wheels. Like, I would love to bring out a line of rim brake wheels. Like, at the moment, I don't have enough hours in the day to get it going. But yeah, that is something I would totally do. I would bring out a range of rim brake wheels because I feel like everyone else has stopped doing it. So yeah, in-house brands for products is definitely something I want to do. And we have several things coming in 2025. But I don't want to do anything just for the sake of doing it. I only want to do it if it brings something to consumers, if that makes sense.
Good answer. You passed the test. So Quick Pro released that AR1, and it's really light, and that got Joe excited. But Chris, you're probably looking at that going, it's probably half as thin as it needs to be. Stretch those tubes out. Give me some watts. Is someone right and someone wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I just can't get that excited about the bike. And I know Joe's going to want to sit here and tell me that it's stiff and, it's reactive and all that kind of thing. But I suppose once this thing gets up to speed, I just don't see this being that particularly exciting. And the fight to get, I think what I'm more about is the fight to get these one bike to do it all shaped bikes down to climbing bike weights is just not something that moves the needle for me. And I think ultimately, now that we're looking at bikes we're looking at almost 1,000 gram 40, 50 mil wheel sets, like from the likes of Fast Sports, it's starting to become almost an irrelevant number, that frame, or to a point, obviously. Like, I'm not going to say a 1,000 gram frame that's got no aero tubing is ahead of its time by any stretch of the imagination. But I don't know. It's just not something that's getting me going, basically.
Yeah, I think this the way I'd look at this is let's take the UCI weight limit, 6.8 kilos. I think there's two trains of thought. Some people want to lower that weight limit, like me. I think lower the UCI weight limit to 5.5 kilos and just see what crazy hacks you get the mechanics putting together on the hilly days, like crazy one-by setups, or just the front wheel's an aero wheel, but the rear wheel's a climbing wheel, which in my opinion is the fastest way up a hill, but no one does it because it looks ugly. But this is racing. We're not about looking good. But then there's the other train of thought, which is I want the UCI weight limit to be 8 kilos, because then the bike designers, they can go mental in what they put on bikes. You'll have people with built-in aero sensors on handlebars and, just crazy, crazy stuff. So I would also like to see that world and see what they came up with. I'm not saying it would be bad, but if I had the choice, if I'm the head of the UCI tomorrow, number one, I'd say definitely change the weight limit. Let's mix it up a bit. Things have got a bit boring. So either drop it down to 5.5 or raise it up to 8 kilos. I don't really care which one.
I get a little frustrated because the selection of frames, I'm on Chris's side in that you've been able to buy a 900 gram frame, you get a light carbon LCR, whatever it is. You could get that 5 years ago. And so what's the progress been there? Well, we've shaved 100 more grams off on average for the top end ones, and they've gotten a slight bit more aero because we've camtailed the tubes a little bit. Maybe the fork's a bit deeper. To me, that's not a lot of progress. I get annoyed when I load up I go on Panda Podium, I go frame sets, and there's 2 aero ones and 6 climbing do-it-all ones. I'm those 6 could basically be 2. They're all the same. Give me 6 different, real chunked out ones, semi-chunked out, all different wide forks. I just feel like there's more room for individualization in the aero side, and then the do-it-all climbing side, they're all kind of the same. That's what I think.
I think point number one, the bike industry has been about asking for new money for old rope for the past 20 years. Look at group sets. A top tier group set still costs $2,000-$3,000. And what innovation have we had? We went from 6-speed to 7-speed to 8-speed to 9. Did no one back in the day just go, hey, why don't we just go straight from 9-speed to 12-speed? No, they're okay, we need to make this last, boys. Everything else. A Shimano Dura Ace crank set these days, I'm sure there have been some advances in I don't know, alloys or something to make them even not split apart would be nice. But to drop some weight off them would be even nicer. And still, a Shimano Dura Ace crankset weighs like 150 grams, 200 grams more than a Cyber crankset, whatever. It's almost inexcusable. So, but this is what the bike industry is built around, like small incrementations and slowly things getting better.
Is that by design or is that just by laziness? And so, because I got all sooky about this after Eurobike, thinking it's by design, that we're just being drip fed this, what the bike in 10 years is already designed. Like, or is it just we'll just throw them a bone and we'll just come up with another gear next year. All right, cool, signed off, move on. Is it just, or is it just that, wait, do you have a take on that?
So I'd say that it is by design, but also the design can be disrupted. So for example, if we take group sets, their thing for the longest time was there were so many patents that no one could touch them. So they can literally just bring out one new group set every year. In a world without patents, that's not saying I want that world, but in a world without patents, back when group sets were going from 7-speed to 8-speed, someone could have just came along and gone, haha, I've made a 12-speed one. Like, congratulations, 10 years of progress in 2 days. Like, there was nothing physically stopping that from happening. It was just, okay, let's protect our business interests and slowly increment it. And I think the same thing was happening with like barriers to entry with like factories and stuff. So if you have a big factory that has the good technology to make good equipment, then you can only get into that factory if you're a big brand with big order numbers, et cetera, et cetera. And the lack of distribution channels. So back in the day, Chinese brands couldn't sell direct to consumer because there wasn't enough knowledge or there wasn't enough China cycling YouTube channels or the Nero shows or whatever. So no one knew about them. So there was this barrier to entry like, okay, this year, lads, we're going to knock off 50 grams off the wheel set and everyone's going to think it's amazing. Whereas when you take away those barriers to entry, boom, I just knocked 200 grams off your wheel set. Like, what we're going to do now? So I will say that it is by design, but the designs can be disrupted. Now, which designs can and cannot be disrupted, it obviously depends on which product and stuff like this. But also, of course, I do think the laws of physics are the laws of physics. And as you get close to the edge, like, it's diminishing returns, right? Like, I don't think that Specialized secretly have a 300-gram Athos 5 that's already ready and they're just waiting for it. Like, I don't think that exists. Like, I'm not proper tinfoil hat. But yeah, I do think some of it is, drip feed by design.
Do you think they ended the Venge knowing that they were going to bring it back? You had to guess.
I'm sure every year there is an internal, or even every few months, there's an internal meeting of if someone goes and does the research, are aero bikes trending? If we had to make an aero bike tomorrow, how much would it weigh? Blah, blah, blah. I'm sure every 3 months in Specialized, there is this conversation, this meeting. Yeah, good answer. And the head of road, he either green lights it or he red lights it.
You reckon it's that closely monitored and would be that immediate a turnaround? You're probably right.
But for a frame, I think Specialized is like a 2 or 3 year like product cycle. Like, so they wouldn't be able to get it out the door tomorrow, which again is an advantage of a Chinese brand, let's say. But if we go back to the group sets, because I think it's an easier issue, when SRAM went from 10-speed to 11-speed, did they know that they would do 12-speed in 3 years' time or whatever? 100%, I reckon they did. Like,
should the average road rider buy a complete bike or do a custom build?
Custom. Next question.
Complete. Clearly.
Stop.
Package, Jesse.
Hold the phone. We cannot continue. We have a disagreement. Chris, why should you buy a complete bike and not custom build one?
I think we're at a point. So let's say, for example, someone does go ahead and specs up Joe's Quick Pro AR and throws on the new Fast Sports 1,000 gram wheels. Now, okay, they've just created this super lightweight. God, that's going to be light. The ride quality of what you've just put together is very much up in the air. Now you can make assumptions about that. I mean, obviously there's reviews around the Quick Pro being, stiffness to weight, all that kind of stuff. That's going to probably be what those wheels are. And if you are very conscious of the bike that you're putting together from a ride perspective, not just a specs perspective, and I think this is where the custom build thing is starting to get out of control, and Jesse's potentially to blame here, that we're really starting to individually spec off every component, and we're losing sight of what the actual thing is that you're putting together, which is a bike. Flip that to boring old Mr. Mainstream, who's packaged together a bike with potentially less as sexier specs, but a ride quality that you do know, or you potentially have the option to test ride, or there is good resources out there that will give you an idea about what that bike will feel like when you actually throw your leg over it. So, and that might not be the case in 12 months' time, but right now I think that there's just there's too much spec hunting when it comes to the custom build, and not enough what's the bike actually going to ride like for you, which is going to be a safer thing if you go mainstream complete package.
Yeah, I think there's some merit in what you're saying. Like a bike is definitely more than the sum of its parts, and there's the hope that when a brand is speccing their complete bike, they have this in mind. Like, I don't know, like, oh, we know this frame rides really rough, so we put a more comfortable saddle on it, for example, stuff like this that, makes the complete bike a better experience. But yeah, that's putting a lot of faith in brands to say they actually do this. I mean, we hope they do, but they might just rummage around the bin and see what's cheapest saddle to put on there anyway. But
so my response was going to be, I like where it was going. The reason why I started to divert away from the fully built options from the mainstream brands was because they hadn't put thought into how they were built. So it was actually in spite of that. So to come back to a complete bike to try and get that back, I just don't feel like there's enough brands doing it well. And that's probably a missed opportunity for them. If all the brands had really nice specs and it all made a lot of sense, even if it was a bit heavier and things like that, you could say, yeah. But
here's a good example. So, Jen's SL8.
Mm-hmm.
So that's custom built. So it's an SL8 frame. You can probably help me out here, Joe. That's got Cybre cranks on it.
correct.
CRW wheels.
CRWs, Tavelo bars. It's
Tavelo
got
bars.
Hope
See, now
brakes.
I think that's now turned into dog shit. Sorry, Jen. But
Too light? Too
it's gonna
fast? Too cheap?
too
Too good
certainly
looking?
it's going to I think that bike, the actual ride of that bike, given the specs that are now on it, is going to be too stiff, too twitchy, super twitchy.
Mm-hmm.
That's my take. But obviously, and flip that. Okay, put SRAM Force on it. The Roval wheels. It's probably going to lose a bit of that snap, but I just think overall it's going to be a better performing bike for what she does. She's not racing.
I'll talk about Jen's bike as well. For me, Jen's bike, her biggest advantage is this bike now has her crank length, her stem length, her ball width, and the wheels that she wanted, right? Like, if I buy a complete bike, I don't get to choose my rim depth. Like, if I always ride on the flats, then okay, after I buy the bike, I need to put some deeper wheels on it. Or if I'm always climbing, after I buy the bike, I need to buy some climbing wheels. Oh, I just bought the bike, and 9 out of 10 bike brands, even the extra small size, still comes with 170mm cranks. Like, thanks, mate. I've got to change my cranks now. You're messing up that. And the same with bar width and stem length. Just, we'll assume you want a 40 centimeter bar on your brand new race bike. No, it's a race bike. I want a racing bar on it, please. So the amount of money you'd have to spend, like, I don't know how much a bike shop charges these days to change a handlebar in the West, but because everything's fully internal these days, you're ripping out all the hydraulic hoses, and it's not a small job. Like, so let alone the cost of the bar, the cost of the labor to do that. Like, now, of course, because Jen got the components and built it, she had to pay someone to build the bike. Don't get me wrong, but the bike that she got out of it is the bike that she wanted with all the components that she wanted too. And again, I think there are some places where you can just save money and get a better product. Like the cranks are the easiest one to go for. The Cybre cranks, like they're lighter than anything from Shimano or SRAM. They're cheaper, and I think she got the 165s, in which case they came out the exact same mold as Pogacar's did that he had on his TT bike in the Tour de France. So, like, tick, tick, tick.
Confirmed. Tadej's mold. That is confirmed.
I think, Chris, you're having a frustration with potentially so many options now, but not a lot of people actually testing them, riding them, giving feedback. And so you've just got this glut of choices if you want to custom build something, and really nothing to base it off other than the weight and
Specs.
maybe an idiot like me who's actually only ever I've ridden like one set of them. I just put the reserves on. Even my opinion of them is relatively inexperienced. I haven't tested every wheel.
That's why I said I think we're at a really interesting point with this custom build stuff, because it's got to the point where almost every spec is possible. Joe's made it completely possible to source, name a rim depth, name an internal rim depth. I can probably find the bloody thing. But no one actually really knows how that rides. And how does it ride with an S5 frame? How does it ride with a TCR frame? How does it ride on a Quick Pro AR frame? I think it's probably a bit different across all of that. And so that's all. That was, I think, why I'm coming back to fuck it, just get the bloody thing that everything, go to the store and get that. The crank length handlebar width thing, I can't argue that. You got me there every time.
Yeah, I think with great power comes great responsibility, right? Just because you can mismatch parts and make the bike of your dreams doesn't mean you should. But I do imagine that Chris is the kind of guy who's like scrolling Instagram and sees like, I don't know, a Colnago with Roval wheels and just kind of like has a bit of an aneurysm, like Roval wheels only go on Specialized and, all this stuff. So, just because you can build a bike doesn't mean you should, I guess.
Why don't BOA work with Chinese brands, Joe? What's going on?
Good question. Now, obviously, I don't know anyone at BOA, and I don't know what their official policy is, and so I can only say what I've heard through the old Chinese grapevine, as it were. There's two ways to look at it, right? So, number one, every Chinese shoe brand that has talked to me has told me that BOA will not work with Chinese brands. Now, I'm sure that in BOA, they don't have a written in stone policy that says do not work with Chinese brands. Like, there's got to be some reason for it, right? Now, one thing I imagine is I know all BOA dials, they come with a lifetime warranty on the dials, right? And if you're just making shoes willy-nilly without any expertise, and you put the dials on there at the wrong angle or something, are they going to be being stressed too much? And then someone's going to have a whole bunch of broken dials, and it's going to make BOA look bad, right? So, of course, BOA are going to be very picky about who they work with. Apparently, if you want BOA dials on your shoes, BOA have to come into your factory and like train you how to use their dials and stuff. Like BOA are really strict about who they work with, which makes sense. You're the most popular, leading, most reputable, reliable brand. You want to maintain that image, right? But I do think some of it is obviously Chinese brands have a reputation for copy-paste design. And a shoe is probably something that's pretty easy to reverse engineer, right? Like, I buy the latest S-Works shoe, I unstitch it, and I just lay it down on leather, trace around it. Okay, that's the upper taken care of. The sole, probably not the most complicated carbon layup in the world. I can probably go to the factory that makes it for them and get them to ship it to me as well. Now, if the only thing I'm missing from this puzzle is the BOA dial, and then I can bring out a literal one-of-one copy for half the price, because a shoe, they all look pretty much the same. I imagine it would be hard to say he copied my shoe design because they all look pretty much the same anyway. So
Coming
I do believe
2025 and a podium.
the BOA dial is the last thing that like these Western brands can keep from the Chinese brands to stop them having the same product at half the price, let's say. So, and of course, BOA, their biggest customers are these big brands, the Specalized, the Bonds. It's very ironic. I have these right behind me. These have been behind me for like 3 or 4 videos now, so this wasn't an intentional placement. But yeah, I'm sure.
They're the Vapor S?
Yeah, the Vapor S. I've got the SLs downstairs as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sure BOA, knowing that these brands are their biggest customers, they want to protect these guys too, right? So yeah, that's my take on it. Do we think?
But an S-Works shoe with a BOA dial is still made in China, isn't it? So
correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So like they will give their dials to the brands to use in factories in China, but these factories are then not allowed to put those dials on non-authorized shoes. So you guys help fill me out. Like, so I obviously live in this bubble where every Western cyclist I talk to loves Chinese bike parts. Like they've just spent a whole bunch of money buying them. How is it on the streets these days? Like when you guys are at these group rides, when you guys are in the races, what is the kind of vibes like? And I guess from multiple angles, if you can, like number one, like is it cool or not cool? Or number two, do people reckon it's fast or not fast? Number three, do people think you're smart for buying the Chinese stuff? Is there still some like racism, xenophobic? Like what's it like when you guys are riding like with the Chinese stuff? But like when you rock up on so you obviously go around a lot on your Tavelo. Like when people ask you the first question, like what's that? And then you tell them, and then you say, it's from China. What face do they give you when you say it's from China?
It's not, to me, like my opinion is that once there's lots of people using them, like those examples, now I think generally is viewed as the smart choice. I don't think anyone thinks the products are, even if you looked at the CRWs, I don't think there's the perception that they are better than a Western product. Even if you think they are, I can't think of a Chinese product that is regarded as better than the Western ones. So I don't think it's gotten through there, but there's definitely I don't think there's a stigma around it anymore. As Chris said, I think it's the smart choice. The holdback is just seeing them across different product categories beyond bars, stem, power meter, and wheels. I mean, the frame, obviously by that I basically mean frame and group set. But they're probably the 2 hardest ones to get someone to purchase because you're basically changing over everything. So that's naturally going to take longer, I guess.
I was going to say, I think that's fair though, because I would say that frames are the one area where on average the Chinese brands have more catching up to do, because I think frames are a lot more complicated than people think, and a lot more complicated than a wheel set or a handlebar, for example. Like, let's say a handlebar, it's a pretty easy thing to make. Like, in terms of making one that can go toe-to-toe with a Western handlebar, it's not that difficult, asterisk. Compared to a frame where you have, the all of the trade-offs between comfort and compliance and handling versus stability and all of these nuanced things, and then put that in every size of the frame as well. Like, do you have someone in your company who can ride every single size of this frame to test it? Or did you just have one guy ride the meat? Like, number one, there could be a Chinese brand where no one in the company rides bikes, so we don't even know how it rides. Like, but then even you have like maybe 1 or 2 guys who ride bikes. So they tested like the medium or the small, and then the extra large, they were kind of like, maybe that'll ride okay. So there's just so much more nuance in a frame where me personally, like, I think the Chinese frames we have now are good, but compared to the best Western frames, I still think there is a gap. Whereas wheels, I think Chinese wheels have already caught up to or overtaken, Western wheels. Like,
where
so
do you think the catching up is to do on the frames? Is it in comfort? Surely it's not in weight. Is it that? Don't you just use higher modulus carbon and take a few layers out?
I'd say aerodynamics and ride characteristics, just basically the balance of the frame. Like, because with frame design, almost everything is a trade-off, right? Like, if you want more of A, you're going to lose B and C, like stiffness versus aero versus weight, blah, blah, blah. And I think lots of the Chinese brands, they fall into because they want to be able to market it well, they like min-max things a lot. You know, for the sake of being able to say, I've got the most X, A and B just get absolutely destroyed. Whereas if you wanted the second highest X or the third highest X, like, so it's still very stiff, just not the stiffest, you could not mess up the rest of the design of your frame so much. So, like, as we were talking about earlier, are there going to be Panda Podium products one day? And I said I'll only do something if no one else steps up to the plate and does it. Well, maybe I'll end up making frames, but like, obviously that's jumping in at the deep end and a huge project. So yeah, we'll see. But yeah, I definitely think there's a lot of room to be had for frames, and also just like small details. Like, if anyone buys a frame, they're gonna have to build it up themselves, obviously. Even to this point now, I don't think there's any Chinese frame brand that ships with a decent instruction manual.
Yeah.
Like,
Yep.
come on, guys. Like, and it's not a huge problem at the issue, because anyone who buys one of these frames is obviously a bike nerd, or they're taking it to a bike shop and the bike shop knows their way around a bike and stuff. But if you ever want to take it mainstream, you need that good instruction manual. Like, I feel that's another place where wheels and frames are different, because almost any consumer at this point can set up a new wheel set, you know, especially if they're using tubes. Put a tube in, put a tire in, put the rotors on, put a cassette on, and I can put it on my bike. But building up a complete bike frame is already hard enough. And then with no instructions either, like, yeah, lots of work to be done there. So I think that's one of the reasons why you see a lot less people with Chinese frames than Chinese wheels. But I will say, from my analytics that I have and my data I have, like, Australia seems to be like, the average Australian roadie seems to be a lot more accepting of the Chinese stuff than definitely more than Europeans. Like the traditional countries who like the traditional brands, obviously they're a lot less likely to take on board a Chinese brand. But I'd say the US, Australia, and the UK are a bit more willing to accept the Chinese stuff.
I would almost argue one of the reasons we do is because the stock of mainstream products is so hard to get here half the time that waiting lists can be, you know, multiple months. And this is where a Panda Podium like comes into play. Hang on, I can just log in, buy that wheel set that basically has the same specs. Yes, please. So yeah, probably just our laziness.
Are there wind tunnels that brands can use in China? How come every Chinese frame, it seems like, oh, we're going to send it off to Silverstone? Like, can't they do? Surely China can make a freaking wind tunnel. They can make bridges in the clouds. It's not that. Surely it's not that hard. Because the Tavello sent me wind tunnel results compared to a SL7, I think. Like, a screenshot wasn't useful at all, and it was in Chinese. I don't even know what it was saying. They've obviously got access to some wind tunnel. Probably should have asked them, but.
There are a few wind tunnels around. The majority of them are probably reserved for military developments. And so, especially for me, that puts it, like, as a foreigner, like, I can't be hanging around anywhere there. But also, the wind tunnel is just part of it. You need the expertise as well. Like, so, number one, the expertise of how to use the wind tunnel. So there are a few wind tunnels around, like, usually associated with universities. And in China, like every university is like famous for something. So a bunch of the automotive universities, they have wind tunnels. Obviously, the people running those wind tunnels, the technicians, they're used to putting cars in there at like 100 k's an hour and trying to get the best EV range. Like the speeds that you're going to be testing your bike at, they might not be that great at running the wind tunnel. And then there's the other part of it of like having to interpret the data as well. Like let's say brand X tests this thing and it turns out it's good at this yaw angle, but it sucks at that yaw angle. It's like, okay, what do I do with that information? Like knowing how to make that into a better product is a whole different category. If you just want to throw it in the wind tunnel and then put someone else's bike in the wind tunnel and have a graph that's all in Chinese, like what Jesse saw, yeah, you can do that. But again, that at this point is mostly just for marketing. But that's what the Western brands are doing as well. So I'd prefer they didn't copy the Western brands in using that just for marketing. So yeah, to answer your question, there are wind tunnels available, but is there the expertise to actually use them and make a better product with them is probably the question mark.
I reckon, what do you think, gents? Is that a quick shout to Mark Tucker behind you over your left shoulder there, Joe?
Yeah. He gave me that when I was over. He's a beast, man. He's a beast.
He's crazy strong.
So I'm obviously a small guy, and usually if I'm behind someone, like I get more of an aero drag if I more of a draft. Sorry, if I don't go aero HUDs. But when I'm behind Mark Tucker and he goes into his aero position, I'm just like, where did he go? Where did he go? He's the only guy I can go in my aero position behind him and actually get a draft. But I can't do the power he does, so it's game over anyway. But Mark Tucker is an absolute weapon.
All right, gents, on that note, potentially see you next year, Joe. What do you reckon?
Yeah, no, it's always fun to come on and have a good chinwag. In the comments down below, people can let us know like what we got right, what we got wrong, and if I get bashed too bad, I gotta come back and defend myself, I guess. So
that's it.
Yeah, maybe see you next year.